Well, good morning, everybody. We like to try and start things out as early or on time as we can. I want to start out by thanking Michelle and Jay of the Library Council for helping to set this event up. This is a good event for us. We have done a number of these with local government officials just to talk a little bit about what we anticipate, what we're seeing, but more importantly, opening up for discussion with all of you. So we can get your input as to what you're seeing and how things are actually going out there. From the auditor's office perspective, 600 of our 800 employees can work remotely on any given day anyway, so it's been relatively seamless. Our productivity and audits have continued on at about the same pace as last year. We're a little down, but mostly on the same pace. And so we're seeing our operations adjust to the new normal. What you're seeing out there is what we want to know. Hopefully our people are interacting with you on any audits that are ongoing. You're getting the support, the information you need. One of the things we want to caution everybody about during this process is to anticipate fiscal shortfalls. This is a new normal. We anticipate from the state perspective, remember we're on a fiscal year which ends July 1st. We're anticipating, just to close out this fiscal year, upwards of a 20% reduction just for this fiscal year. Now, remember, we're trying to close things down in a relatively short period of time before the July 1 deadline. And so in that regard, we're anticipating an adjustment. You need to be anticipating an adjustment as well. Most of you are probably on a calendar year basis, and so hopefully you have more time to adopt changes or adjustments to adjust for any revenue depletion. But you need to probably be anticipating some kind of an adjustment as well. And so that's one of the things we want to have the discussion with as the state goes into the next fiscal year. For us, starting July 1st, we do anticipate that's going to be an adjustment. It's going to be an adjustment of both our sales tax revenue and our income tax revenue. And so that's going to likely be an adjustment in your library funds that come through as well at some point. Still unknown what those are going to be, but adjustments are going to be necessary. So from that perspective, if you want to ask a question, if you want to participate live, you can click the raise your hand button and we will call on you. And when we do that, just need to unmute your mic if you're currently muted, and we'll move forward to have that discussion. Again, a couple of things to be watching for. One is state income tax. We're kicked from April till July. And so we know that that's going to be a fiscal year adjustment for the state. It's going to kick revenues out of this fiscal year, which ends July 1st, into the fiscal year that is next year. According to the tax commissioner in my conversation with him last week, they get between 20 and 30% of their overall income tax revenue with the April filing. And so that is a significant adjustment from one fiscal year to another. It is anticipated that the state will have to use we'll wait to see what the feds do and what the options are for the governor, but it is anticipated that the governor will be required to go into the rainy day fund to balance this fiscal year. And that could mean an adjustment and the options to use the rainy day fund, depending on the balances that are necessary for the next fiscal year. And that means the governor and the legislature may have to come back and do some adjustments. And since in theory, the library funds are a revenue sharing entity, it may impact your numbers. So just be aware of that. Start those conversations with your legislators. That's where that call is going to be ultimately made. To the extent you're relying on other revenue, if it's property tax revenue, unless there is a delay in the payment of property taxes, those revenues should be relatively constant, because remember, they're done on a 3-year average of the property tax base. But there is a discussion out there to allow communities to defer their property tax adjustment and reappraisal. I don't know that that's going to happen. I don't know the tax commissioner is real favorable to that idea, but that's something that's being discussed. There is a discussion in some communities about a delay or deferral. Our office position is that if a delay or deferral is necessary for COVID reasons, that's better handled on an individual by individual basis than doing a blanket across the board policy. Let people get some forgiveness for late payments, for the penalties and the interest and those late payments as necessary, but do not say to effectively banks who have been collecting money on mortgage payments and escrow have those delays. So we think that that is probably similar to the position that's going to be adopted, but we're waiting to hear on that as well. From audits, hopefully our auditors are getting their records and things they need from you. If they need to pick up things, they may be asking your offices to pull them and put them in a conference room, and those kind of things. So if you'd like to participate, we're coming to the point where I'm about to open this up for discussion. If you'd like to participate, please raise your hand, click the raise your hand button, and we'll call on you and getting in there. Some things we're going to ask about: how are the public meetings going? Are you using technology? Cybersecurity issues, we're always concerned as more and more people are doing things remotely to make sure you keep your cybersecurity protocols up. And we also have James Coyne here with us, along with some of our other staff, socially distanced, but here in the room with us. James is on the call. His regionals, the regional customer service reps are out there as well, and they are your go-to people if you're having issues with our office. They're here if you have issues as well. So our first one is Kelly Kroll. Kelly, you're on the call, you're on the conference. Unclick your mute and welcome to us. Join us. What can we help with today?
Thank you so much for hosting this. It's very helpful to us, I'm sure, and we appreciate your support. Just had a couple questions. One is concerning, do we know how much the rainy day fund balance is? I mean, of course we know. I'm just curious what the amount is.
Yeah, when a few years ago under Governor Kasich, the Senate increased the balance from 5% to 8.5%, and I think the current balance is about 2.9 billion, give or take. It's effectively somewhere between 18 and 30 days of state spending.
Okay.
So we anticipate, based on the evidence and the information we're hearing, is that they'll need close to half of that just to balance this fiscal year, which ends July 1st. And the number for next fiscal year, I've heard numbers as high as 6 billion needed. So that even with the rainy day fund that's left, it's going to be a significant chunk that's going to need to be adjusted by adjustments in spending. And when you think of state spending, remember, roughly 80 to 85% of state spending comes in three categories: K-12 education, Medicaid, and prisons. Everything else in state spending comes down to that 20 to 15 to 20%. And so that's why it's very difficult to make adjustments. It's very difficult to adjust K-12. It's very difficult to adjust Medicaid, which is a federal entitlement. Now, it's possible that the feds will ramp up the FMATCH for Medicaid, and that will help. It's possible the feds will give some other supplement and assistance, although if you hear the majority leader right now, he isn't real excited about helping the states and giving money to the states. And so that will impact the options for the legislature and for the governor.
Awesome, thank you. My other question,
sure.
Sorry, my other question was regarding, you mentioned real estate tax revenues for those of us that have property tax levies. I'm looking at foreclosures and delinquencies. Wouldn't they still affect our tax revenues, even if, you know, that's all balanced out and the county auditors, you know, collect it based on the previous year? Wouldn't we still have some repercussions from foreclosures or delinquencies for people that can't pay their mortgage or their taxes?
You're going to have some of that, but that's going to be a relatively small percentage of your
Okay.
property base. And really, again, I'm not saying it's not going to have any impact. It's going to be much less than if you look. If we lose 25% of our income tax collection, that's a direct hit. If your sales tax goes down, like we're hearing, autos but down to 40 to 45% in auto sales tax during the months of late March, early April, that's a significant hit for people who rely on sales tax. So the property tax, because it's a much more stable revenue, not as subject to short-term economic fluctuations. If you have an economic downturn that's going to lower property values, you will pick that up in the out years, because remember, we do 3-year reappraisals. It will get picked up, but in the short term, it generally is not as impactful. If people aren't paying their property taxes because they're not getting rental revenue or they're not getting an income to pay those taxes, then you'll see that. But again, right now, that's a much shorter term likelihood.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. Next question, we have about 250 people on the call right now. No one is raising their hand, so we must be just answering all those questions. Where I know we're not that good. So let's go ahead and open up the phone lines. If you want to ask a question, just click the raise your hand button, and we'll open the call right away. We want to have a discussion. These things work a lot better if we're having a discussion. So go ahead and raise your hand, and let's open this up. If not, one of the things that we are concerned about is cybersecurity. Before this all hit, not a day went by that we didn't hear in the auditor's office someplace that somebody got hit with a cybersecurity loss. It can be as simple as somebody asking you to redirect the librarian's paycheck to a different bank account, or as complicated as a situation to where we had a township lost $1.1 million last summer because somebody had hacked into the system that they were using and basically did ACH transactions. And so we're cautioning everybody to be very careful about your ACH limitations and to make sure you're educating your staff on the proper cybersecurity. Don't open attachments, don't bring in outside material, all of those things to do tests, and make sure you hover over the link button to make sure you're doing the right thing. Our first next person on the line is Carl Colin. Carl, hopefully I said your name correct. Go ahead and unmute and welcome to the call. Carl, one more time. Are you there? Carl, go ahead and hit unmute.
He's saying it won't let him unmute. Tell him to submit his question and we'll answer it.
Carl, if we're having technical problems, look, we're trying to make this work. This is about the fourth or fifth one of these we've done, and there are little technical glitches. So Carl, go ahead and submit your question and we'll ask it, we'll read it for you. Next on the line is Michelle Francis. Michelle.
Good morning, Auditor. How are you?
I am fabulous. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for doing this for our members. I will go ahead and ask some questions because even though we are doing this, they're sending me some of their questions and texting them to me. So, so we've gotten, one of the questions I got this morning was about open meetings. And because obviously there were some changes in the most recent legislation so that public entities could continue to do their business, under the sunshine laws. Can you comment a little bit or talk with us a little bit about going forward, especially considering the governor's protocols that were announced yesterday, as far as social distancing and
Sure.
facial covers?
Sure. Let me start out with the open meetings. We asked the legislators specifically to give you the ability to do open meetings by teleconference and by video conference, as long as the public has access to it. And hopefully that's going along okay. Hopefully the formats you figured out. We will be checking on that in our audits, and I've asked our auditors to use maximum flexibility, but the law is the law, and we will note non-compliance. However, if your question how to participate or how to perform that, we can certainly give some advice on that. Hopefully you've all got that figured out by now. It is a pretty straightforward process, and thank you for the legislature for opening that up, allowing us to allow you to do that. With regard to the new normal, now that the governor's opening things up, it is incumbent both under state law and federal law for employers to maintain a safe workplace. And that means that we're all going to be having people disinfect. We're going to all be having people wear masks. We're all going to be having people do the best they can to test that. There are protocols that CDC has put out and that other people have put out that require people to take their temperatures when they first come in. We did that this morning. Everybody in here took temperature. And to my chagrin, when I walked in and took my temperature, I had a bad thermometer. It told me I had a temperature of 104. So we went ahead and found another thermometer that was working right because I took my temperature when I left the house. We do that every day at the Faber house, and I knew I was at 97.6. And so the new thermometer that we found that worked right said 97.6. So you need to have working equipment, so that's the first thing. After that, you need to be doing that and monitoring that, maintaining self workplaces, wiping things down, staying safe, maintain social distance where you can. Everybody here in this room that's working with us this morning, we're maintaining the 6 to 10 foot distance and making sure we're following all the things we need to do. So hopefully, Michelle, that answers that question. If not, let me know and we'll do additional clarification.
So going forward, once we get through, hopefully, this pandemic, would the state auditor's office be supportive of continuing this flexibility in regards to today's technology for purposes of these meetings?
Yeah, I've always been supportive of allowing you to do public meetings by remote process, particularly when it makes sense. There are times when I do think there is an advantage to having everybody in the same room to make that discussion in front of the public so that you have a place where the public can come and see. But we have been supportive of allowing you to conduct business remotely, certainly when it makes sense. And maybe at some point we have the rule that you have to conduct some meetings in person when social distancing isn't necessary. But the fact is we think flexibility is appropriate. Look,
The
60 out of my 800 employees, 600 of them worked remotely before this all happened or had the remote ability to work remotely. So we think working remotely is good. We think, frankly, for most governmental bodies, you can get most of your meetings done without having people have to show up and necessarily. Now, it doesn't mean that that's not good for the public to see the public's business done and be able to come in and directly participate. So that needs to be a balance.
We appreciate that. Thank you. Little one last question that I have in case there's others in the queue, but we have gotten a lot of questions from our members about when it does come time to audit the current time period that we're in right now. And many, just like you've indicated, many of your employees have been working remotely and have the ability to do that. We have several libraries for the past 6 to 8 weeks who have had their employees working remotely. And so we've gotten lots of questions about what type of documentation or how much scrutiny the state auditor's office will be applying in relation to that.
Great question. We ask in the legislators' emergency bill that they passed that they continue to give you the flexibility statutorily to make your call on administrative work assignments and administrative work responsibilities, much like the state and the school districts have. The state has a provision that the head of each entity can determine from administrative purposes and including health, safety, and welfare that somebody is paid without necessarily the direct relationship to the work that they're doing and the time that they're spending. The school districts have a provision that they can continue to pay certain employees during epidemics. We asked for a similar provision put in for local governments, and it just didn't get in. If they come back and do another emergency piece of legislation, I really encourage your association and your lobbyists to make that a priority, to give that authority to all of you. And frankly, if they can retroactively, we would appreciate it. With regard to auditing, we have taken a maximum flexibility time. We did get a language inserted in the bill that when we audit the corona provisions, we have flexibility in waiving audit size standards under certain circumstances. However, that really doesn't help people now. So we're going to ask them to fix that. We ask for it to be unlimited in time. They limit it only to when we're auditing the corona period. And the thought there is that there might be entities that would otherwise qualify for a AUP or an agreed upon procedures audit, which is much less expensive. And we could waive some factors to get them into AUPs. But what they did in their language is they tied it only to audits that occur during this time period. Well, we audit a year or 2 years in arrears, and you all know that. And so audits that occur during this time period will, by the very nature, not cover coronavirus periods. And the two were linked in the language. So what we're doing is asking them to unlink that to give us discretion on audits that we would be starting for the next fiscal year, to give some more discretion to some of the cheaper audits. With regard to looking at particular factors, I've asked all of our auditors during this time period to use what we call maximum flexibility. If we find non-compliance, we will note the non-compliances. We're required to, but where we can, if that's your basis, we'll ask for your reason for the non-compliance, and your basis is public policy with regard to health, safety, and welfare during coronavirus. We will note that in our findings. So just be prepared to keep your documentation. If you are paying people who are working from home, make sure that you're putting documentation in there as to how their activities are operating and helping your business. For example, your librarian's working from home, but while she's working from home, she's doing X, Y, and Z. Or he's doing X, Y, and Z. Here's what they're doing for the benefit of the organization, and here's how we're tracking that, how we're documenting that. Keep a good record that outlines what they're doing, how you're monitoring that, what you asked them to do, and how that's benefiting your organization. And with that, we will essentially be flexible where we can. So hopefully I answered that question for you.
You did. And thank you again for making this available to our members. We really do appreciate it.
Carl, I think we got you back. Is your mic working, Carl?
Hey, I'm unmuted. Yeah, thank you very much for having this today,
Thanks
Auditor
for doing
Faber. We really appreciate it. I'm curious, looking at the state cash flow, given the wild fluctuations that we're going to experience in revenue, especially sales income and so forth, but now maybe we'll have a little more due to reopening. Are we going to experience significant cash flow issues in the state as a result of this change?
Great question. And the answer is it depends. And the reason I say it depends, a lot of it's going to be depending on how the federal money flows in, particularly for some of the coronavirus money that they did provide, and what happens with Medicaid. The state has money at any given time in the billions of dollars for cash flow issues. So the treasurer's office is able to manage that, generally should be all right. Remember, the rainy day funds there, it's in accounts, it can't be spent, but certainly it does help the balances when they're talking about cash flow. But Medicaid, for example, is essentially a reimbursement, and it's a revolving reimbursement. So it's reimbursed in arrears. The question is what happens to the Medicaid numbers, the spike initially, and when you come into it. And right now, depending on what happens with the increase in the caseload and the unemployment funds, Medicaid, because of all the non-essential services that were cut, Medicaid's probably going to be in a short-term position that's very similar to most health plans. The health plans are seeing their reimbursements go down significantly. And the reason for that is, just think about it. If you cut out 50 to 60% of the medical procedures, the medical reimbursements for those 50, 60% of those procedures are going to leave them in a healthier cash balance. Now, whether those get picked up going out in June, July, as they're rescheduled, because most of those health experiences were necessary, they just weren't essential. And in doing that, hopefully that picks up. But if you were on a health plan that ended July 1st, then your medical loss ratio on that health plan is probably going to be healthy if you're the insurer, because you had fewer claims in March, April, May than you otherwise would have had. Well, the state, when you think about Medicaid, is going to be in a similar position, that there are going to be a lot less Medicaid reimbursements in there for certain types of procedures. Now, that's caveated a little bit because 70% of the Medicaid problem is nursing homes. And those are going to be relatively consistent. So the short answer is it going to be a cash flow? It could be, but in the short term, the real issue for the state is it's required constitutionally to balance July 1st, and to have the ability to balance all of this spending with the lack of revenues from April and May, which won't show up until July 1st. It's going to be tough, and we anticipate the governor's going to have to go to the rainy day fund to balance.
Thank you very much.
Our next participant's Laura Lee Wilson. Laura, if you could go ahead and unmute, you're on the call.
Thank you, Auditor. My question has to do with our budget planning and our Board of Trustees. So we know that the May distributions are going to be lower than projected. Would you suggest that the Board of Trustees begin to look at the 20% cut now, or wait until we see what happens with the June distributions?
Look, the earlier you plan and make adjustments, the better off you're going to be. We were asked by the governor early on to do a 20% GRF reduction in non-employee spending lines. We did that. We cut that out of our budget. Most state agencies have done that. We're anticipating a similar adjustment going forward for the next fiscal year. I would just advise you to anticipate making those kind of adjustments. Start looking where you can defer spending, where you can defer hiring, wherever you can do. I think you're better off right now planning. A little bit over a longer period of time is easier to hit than a lot over a little. And so you need to make those adjustments where you can, and now is the time to start. Frankly, it would have been better if you started even a month ago, but we didn't know what we were getting into. I get it. But where we're all trying to rein in expenses where we can, we need to do that.
Great, thanks.
Next caller is George Needham. George, if you could also, when we unmute, tell me where you're from. So we're hearing differences across Ohio, rural, urban, suburban. So it'd be helpful if we know where you're from as well. George, you're on the call.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. This is George Needham. I'm the director of the Delaware County District Library, and we're a little suburban, a little rural, and a little urban. So we've got a little bit of it going on. My question is about the cybersecurity when we have a lot of people working from home. People are using their own devices, their own laptops, their own tablets, their own phones. Any tips or any clues you can give us to make sure that we can do the best we can to keep things secure in this environment? It's kind of a Wild West out there.
Yeah, the best advice is have your IT people make sure that they're getting the best protocols out that they can to all of your users as to the proper safety and the proper VPNs and the proper ways to get through to your system. Hopefully your system is secured, that everybody who comes in is on a VPN, and that you know who's coming in and who's going out. But the basic safety instructions that we give out are: one, don't open anything that has an attachment from somebody you don't know and weren't expecting. Just because you know who they were, you think you know who it is, make sure you're expecting what the attachment is. Hover over the from box to make it's actually from Joe Smith, that it's from Joe Smith's email. It's not from Joe Smith, and the email address is somebody in the Philippines at at 1-800 I'm going to scam you. So that kind of stuff is important. And that cybersecurity training, there's plenty of resources out there on this. And hopefully your IT people have been linking with those resources for some time. There are people out there to tell you how to avoid getting scammed, much better than the auditor's office. We're better at helping you once you get hit. But the protocols, depending on where you're at, you need to be making sure you're participating in that safety and that association. The second thing that's part and parcel here is make sure your system is locked down and separated to the extent you can. Make sure the access to your bank accounts and the access to the things that are where you're going to have high exposure and high risk is not directly accessible from your VPN internet protocols, the people coming in. And that firewalling is going to be very important. And then finally, double check everything you do. We require, for example, if somebody wants to redirect your payroll, require an in-person phone call or require something other than an email. If they change their bank accounts, make sure it's in writing, not just an email. That's an area that people are just being scammed on all the time. The loss that I talked about of the township, $1.1 million, the fiscal officer was online at an employer who had been hacked. And he thought he was logging into his bank account to do some bank account for the transaction for the township, and tried to log in for 3 times and was on a clone screen and basically gave the hackers all of his information. Well, their problem was their ACH limits weren't cranked down. And so in the period of an overnight, they ACH'd out $1.1 million. ACH is essentially electronic checks. It's very different than an electronic funds transfer. You need to make sure your ACH limits, and that's probably how you're doing most of your payroll, are cranked down so that they're no larger than what you would expect to use in an ordinary transaction. And you shouldn't be doing ACH transactions that exceed what your ordinary transactions would be. So it's much more difficult for somebody to ACH out $1 million if you're cranked down to your normal payroll of 2,500 or 5,000 or whatever it would happen to be per transaction. Because the bank's artificial intelligence protocols just don't work as well for ACH transactions as they do EFTs. Now that's a very advanced protocol, but what I would do is have you reach out to your cybersecurity experts and have that conversation with them. We're much better about helping you once you get hit and how to react to it than we are in our office telling you how to prevent getting hit. But there are some experts out there that are really good at that, and hopefully you're utilizing those.
We are. Thank you very much.
I've got my IT director here. Do you have anything you want to add? Here, he'll give you the real answer. Our IT system's very robust, very complex, but we get targeted as well. I literally did a press conference with the treasurer, the auditor, the secretary of state, and the attorney general. And in that conversation, one of the things that was discussed was cybersecurity. Immediately after the press conference, I learned that the treasurer's office had been hit with the website with the hit literally the night before. So it's happening everywhere, and we just encourage everybody to do everything they can. So our IT director's on. Any words of wisdom?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Auditor. So this is Dave Potts. I'm the CIO for the office. One of the things that we do offer is cybersecurity training. If you log into e-services, if you log into UAN Link, if you log into the Hinkle, you will find a link to a cybersecurity class. It's free. Anybody can take it. It is behind any of our login screens, but once you log in, you can take that class, and it's got a lot of those helpful tips that the auditor covered, things that will keep you safe, keep phishing attacks away. That's offered free of charge by the auditor.
Thanks. Hopefully that was helpful. Look, we're here to help. If we have something that we can give you or help you with, look, and our resources are open. One of the things that people have mentioned is that the training, we had to cancel our local government conference. We're going to try and pick that up in theory in the fall by adding an extra day to our fraud conference for some of it, but we try to put a lot of it online to give that training access and availability. Our next caller is Tara Sidwell. Tara, unmute and you're good to go. Welcome to our conference. One more time, Tara. You're still self-muted. Unmute your computer and or your system, and you're on the call. All right, Tara, we're going to keep you on hold for a second. If you can get that worked out, we'll put you back on. Christopher Cisco, it looks like, is our next participant. Chris, are you there, Christopher?
Yes, can you hear me?
Mount Sterling? Go ahead and
Yes.
unmute. Christopher, you're there.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me, Christopher?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, you're perfect.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We've been paying our employees under our Calamity Day policy. And before we did that, we basically, the board has approved that through April 30th. And I had the prosecutor look at our policy first to make sure that we could do that. Should we be marking that in any certain way besides the board minutes for purposes of audit?
The quick answer is make sure you're documenting it and that those documents are readily accessible. But that certainly the fact that you had a policy for that is helpful. I don't know how detailed your policy is and whether your policy needs an expansion for this circumstance, because now you're more than a few days. But again, you want to put maximum parameters around whatever you're doing from your governing authority authorizing that to make sure it's approved. The problem is our initial review, statutorily, we did not have statutory authority to give local governments, in many cases, the authority to pay people who weren't providing work, and that work wasn't related. So you just need to be careful with that. And so we're asking people to make sure you're having people do some valued service until the legislature hopefully gives you that authority. But make sure that you're having them do something and document that service as authorized by your board. And that should be helpful. And we should certainly note that you're paying your people under the following procedures.
Okay, even if they're not working for every hour that they're being paid.
Again, we're trying to give flexibility. I'm trying to have you read between the lines here. If you designate that during this time, the benefit this person's giving is X, Y, and Z, we're not going to go out and look and say, well, we think that only should have taken 39 hours and you paid them for 40. Okay. As long as you're determining as a executive official and your board has determined that paying these people for doing these services, that their continued rate is a benefit to the organization, we can give you flexibility there.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now that doesn't mean you say, okay, I want you to write your name on a piece of paper and that's your 40 hours work week. You're going to have some reasonable relationship to what you're having them do, but we're not going to micromanage that discussion.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Next, Tara, did we get you back? Tara, are you there? All right, our next caller, Aisha, is your mic working?
Yes, it is. Can you hear me?
I can hear you great. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully this is helpful to you. Go ahead.
It is.
You're on the
It
call.
is. Thank you so much for doing this. My name's Asha Vias. I'm from Tip City. We're suburban. The community is about 10,000.
Yep, thank you.
My question is for audit purposes. What sort of proof would you be looking for to prove we had an open electronic meeting?
Okay. The first question is with your electronic meetings, you should be recording it. You should be having some kind of a transcript that you put up on or available, or you should have proof that you actually had the meeting. In your minutes, you can say, okay, we did it through a Skype professional, and here was the call-in email address that we published, and here's how we published it. Or however you're doing those, it could be through Zoom, and here's how we publish the access to it. But to the extent that you can record those, and at the beginning of the meeting, I would indicate how you publicized it and how you made it available to folks. That should be sufficient. Certainly, if you're publicizing it on your web page, take a screenshot. Those kind of things to show that you're giving the public access. And it may be that you're recording them and putting the recordings up on your web page. All of those are things that you should have a good record of. Document what you're doing and how you did it, and certainly those should be very helpful during the audit period.
Okay, just to follow up a little bit, the recording part of it. Say someone didn't record it.
As long as you started recording after you found out you should be recording, that's going to be helpful. Okay.
Okay. And after this is
we're learning through this, and we're going to be as I said, maximum flexibility. If you can document for us through a memo or through some documentation that showed us that you made it available to the public could access it. Okay. That's fine. Recording to us is you should be recording them. But if you, for example, did your first two by conference call or by Skype and you didn't record them, as long as you can show that the public had access to it, you should be fine. Because having a conference call that the public doesn't have access to a recording or access to listen to live is essentially like you're meeting in private. And so that's our concern. And do the best you can. Again, we're all learning as we go through this. If, come May, you're still doing the same thing, then we got another problem.
Sure. So it is available live to our patrons and anyone else in the community that wishes to join in. But as another layer, you're telling me we do have to also record it. Is that correct?
I would record them, yes.
Okay.
Okay. Look, and it doesn't cost. It's almost, look, we're recording this call. Okay. It doesn't cost much to keep those recordings and to do those recordings in this technological era. And so it should be helpful.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right. Anita Carroll, you're on. You're the next person on our call list. Anita, are you there? One more time for Anita.
I didn't have a question.
Oh, wow.
I'm here, but I don't have a question. So sorry.
You doing? Well,
I'm
Anita,
good.
how you holding up? Since I've got you on the conference call, how you holding up? How's your community doing?
I can ask a really kind of small time question is, as I'm ordering PPE for my staff for our reopening, since our building isn't open, I'm having it delivered here. How do I document that I'm not buying that stuff for my personal use? What I'm doing is I'm having my fiscal officer examine the products and putting it against the packing list to make sure what I've ordered to be delivered here is actually received. Is that sufficient?
Again, just make a notation in your records, was delivered to the librarian's home because the primary location wasn't over. Here's the packing list. Here's what we use this stuff for in the official business. It was all transferred over. As long as you've got that documentation, you're fine.
Okay, perfect. Great. Thank you.
Back to you're having two-person controls, we really like two-person controls. So that's,
I see. I thought you would.
it's much more difficult for two people to engage in a scheme of fraud and corruption than
I
for
agree.
and so I
agree.
always say two-person controls help you. So thanks for doing
Plus,
that. Stay safe. Keep providing
thank
service.
you. You too. No problem. Thanks.
Our next caller is Deborah Herman. Deborah, oh, it's submitted question from Deborah. Deborah's question is, we are doing a CAFR and is there some recommended language regarding the pandemic to put in subsequent events? The short answer is our people, or when you find something, it's always good to notate something, that you did something that was out of the ordinary. You can explain, we did the following, and the reason for doing the following was because of the global COVID pandemic and the shutdown from the governor. That will go a long way to explaining things that go out of the ordinary, or where you use your discretion within the information. Debbie Kerr, Debbie just wanted to say, we have a cyber risk insurance policy for about $2,100 a year. We're a small library with a $1.1 million budget, but after attending a CPIM where Muskegon County Library talked about their experience, we felt it was absolutely necessary. I agree. If you do not have cyber risk insurance, you should. And look, even if you're a $1.1 million budget, for that little bit of cyber coverage cost, you are providing a whole lot of confidence when you get hit. And I always say, it's not a question of if you're going to get hit, it's a question of when for most entities. And so you need to provide that coverage. And with that coverage will come some protocols and some training. I'm sure your insurer will provide some things to support that. I really encourage you to think about cyber coverage and make sure your limits are adequate. Celeste Baker is our next caller. Celeste?
Hello there. Good morning. I want to go back to the recording the public meetings. I'm hoping that you're going to say it's enough that I am taking detailed minutes, and we post them internally to our employees, and they are also placed on our website. So, and that is the same protocol that we've had, through this. Do you want us to have that extra layer of actually video recording these meetings?
Are you meeting electronically? Are you meeting with phone or Skype or Zoom or whatever?
Zoom. We've only had one meeting so far, and it's been through Zoom.
Yeah, I would encourage you to use the Zoom has a record feature, I understand.
Okay.
So I would encourage you to record it. Certainly take your minutes as well, but
okay.
Record it, and then I think you can post that recording up on your website, or make
okay.
and so people have an access to it. Look, on this electronic format, keeping the recording is so easy to do in most formats, and it's just an easy safeguard. You got to continue to keep your minutes. Your board still has to approve your minutes. You have to do all the same protocols. But one of the expectations when we got the legislature to pass the electronic meeting is the ability for public to have access to it, so that they have a recorded record of what went on for them to see after the fact, or if they didn't know that it was being recorded or whatever. So the public access is the feature for the recording.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, and again, the fact that you didn't record the first one isn't fatal. Okay, the end of the world isn't going to come. But we would really appreciate you take appropriate steps to try and do that going forward.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Don't lose sleep. Everything's good. The maximum flexibility. Our whole reason here is two things. One, if you're trying to do transparency and you're trying to have good records and you're trying to do everything right, and you're not sure what it is, call our people. Call our customer service reps. James Coyne and our regional reps are there to help. If you're not sure of something, ask them. They are out there to help. They'll give you guidance. And the other thing is when your auditors come in, ask them what they can do or what you can do to improve. If you need help, if you're having a fiscal problem or you're having questions with regard to operations during this tough time, don't forget we've got our LGS folks, our local government service support units out there to help. And if you're worried about performance and how you're going to get by into the new normal with fiscal cuts, we have our performance audit team that can come in and tell you some best practices that we're seeing in other entities. And so we're here to help. we want to make sure everything gets is going as well as we can, and to get things back to normal how we can. Paula submitted a question asking if we can do this type of call again in a couple of months to touch base. The short answer is yes. We'll work through your association to set it up. We're here. We think these are helpful. We're trying to do a couple a week with different local government entities just to share thoughts and make sure we get everything communication wise that we can. We're all in this together, and candidly, we want to make sure we're all letting Bob and Betty Buckeye have the very best services, the very best government they can, with as much transparency. We're getting a lot of comments coming in about how to manage public meetings. We will follow up and send out some suggested guidance. But again, if you're not sure, call one of your regional reps. You should know who your regional rep is. If you don't, contact our office. Email me at keith@ohioauditor.gov, keith@ohioauditor.gov, and we'll get those to James Coyne, and he'll get them out to you as well. But hopefully our regional reps have gotten to know you. That I always told them that's their responsibility to get to know your customers. It's not your responsibility to know them, it's their responsibility to know you. So with that, we are wrapping up. We're coming to the end of our deadline, our time frame that we had for this, and I don't want this thing to end automatically. So apparently we don't have that kind of outline, so we just got another call set up. But I want to thank you all for participating today. Again, thank your association so much for helping to set this up. And if you have questions or things that our office can do to help make your world work better and help you get through this new normal, we're here to help. Thanks so much. And more importantly, thanks for the work you do providing citizens of Ohio the best library network in the entire country. God bless you, stay safe, and thanks for joining us.